Hello everybody, where today we are looking at a brand new article by Android Central which reveals some information and also is the tried and true formula of saying PSVR2 is dead. But there is some information we can pry out of this that is actually very useful, and also some views from industry insiders on the headset, on what Sony's thinking about the headset. This is the first time we've actually gotten, maybe, potentially, obviously these sources are not confirmed, a look into what Sony is thinking about PSVR2 and the road ahead, essentially. So we'll take a look and read. This is from Android Central, and the article is titled "Sony no longer cares about the PSVR2, and neither should you," by Nicholas Sutrich. Bit of background on this journalist: he does mostly Quest-focused articles, talking a lot about Arkham VR, his experience with Behemoth he covered a little while ago, and mostly about how Quest is evolving and developing, and covering that platform mostly, along with a couple of phone reviews and a little bit on the Apple Vision Pro on the side. They rarely cover PSVR2, but today is an exception. The article has just come out and they have, so they've got quite a good track record in covering VR over the last, couple years or so. Let's get on to what the article says. Before we do that though, if you want to consider subscribing, we're trying to get to 10k, and any help would be much appreciated towards that goal. Anyway, let's jump in. The article starts off with, "It's a sad, disappointing story that could have been so much better. Until now, the PSVR2 has been a pretty darn good VR headset. Well over 200 games are currently available, with several impressive releases like Horizon, Gran Turismo 7, and the duo of Resi Village and Resi 4. However, the headset now is an insurmountable problem. Sony no longer cares about it." This opening paragraph, pretty standard, over 200 games available, absolutely right. But I think there is a bit of dissonance between the points just starting off here. We say that there are 200 games available, and that's a great thing, but then you follow that up by saying Sony doesn't care. These two things aren't really linked. Sony's game support has not affected indie porting processes at all so far. The reason we have 200 games isn't because Sony has thrown a load of money at PSVR2 indie devs, it's because those indie devs have wanted to bring their games over to the headset. So whether or not we get another big AAA Sony release this year or not, it's not going to stop the indie games from coming over. Say in like 2 years and Sony has no interest in promoting the headset at all and nobody's buying it or playing it, that would affect indie games being ported over, because then there'd be no market for them. Nobody would want to buy them because not many people would own and play the headset. But linking Sony's lack of interest in making new VR games to the library of indies that we have just doesn't really make too much sense to me. But they are definitely right. Horizon, GT7, Resi 4 Village, great games, and we haven't seen really many of those since December when Resi 4 came out. He goes on to say sources close to Android Central have revealed that Sony is making deep cuts to funding for VR games. This would make sense looking at London Studios' closure. They've done a lot of VR stuff in the past, although they weren't working on a VR game at the time of closing. They were working on a live service flat screen game, I believe, if I'm getting my studios right. So not too much to link between there, but we'll give them the benefit of the doubt. If they think their sources are legit, then fair enough. But again, they are a news website, so they are just going to put out whatever's going to get people to click and read, which I am doing, so they have succeeded. But, we'll give them the benefit of the doubt and say these sources are legit. Well, I'll paraphrase for anonymity. My source was told that there will be very few opportunities for VR game development at Sony going forward. That would be really, really bad, in my opinion, obviously. Not a hot take. We need Sony's support in terms of VR gaming going forward as much as possible, and if this is true, we're not going to get much of that. To back that up, another source informed me that only 2 PSVR2 games are in development at Sony. This is the piece of information that's being kind of parroted around all over the internet at the moment. It can be read multiple ways. On the one hand, if it's 2 AAA VR games, wonderful, great. If it's 2 small or hybrid games that say not a lot of people are going to want to pick up, then we have a bit more of a problem. We also don't know what stage of development these PSVR2 games are in. Does this source count as in development as we have working builds and we're actually getting towards release in the next year or so, or do they mean in pre-production? There are so many stages to developing any sort of media product that we just can't really glean enough information from this to understand what stage these games are even in. Although Android Central does go on to say, given the state of the games industry and constant layoffs and studio closings, I don't feel exactly confident that even these games will ever see the light of day if Sony continues on its current trajectory. I'm not sure if I really agree with that last point in terms of VR. We have seen the closure, unfortunately, of First Contact, but their game did not launch very well and they made almost no money from it, I would imagine. So that's the reason for that. They did lay off quite a lot of people at Firesprite, who did Horizon Call the Mountain, which was really rough to see, and closed London studio, although they were not working on a VR title at the time of closing, so that one isn't really relevant. But yeah, we have two examples of Sony either laying off or closing a studio, but one of them was a direct result from the game they published and not the outlook on the VR industry that Sony has as a whole. I do feel like this is a needlessly pessimistic view. There's no source for why they feel like Sony will close these studios or cancel these games, especially if they've invested a bit into them at this point. If they actually have working builds or if they are just in pre-production, it all just depends on what stage in the production pipeline these games are in. And I don't think speculation like this is helpful at all. But the good bit of information in the middle of there is, yes, 2 more PSVR2 games are apparently in development at Sony. Hopefully, these will be fairly big ones since they seem to be first party. If I had to guess what these would be, if we're looking at games that are in proper production, I would say Ace Combat 8 could be one of them. Or if we're looking at any stage in the production process, Gran Turismo 8 could also be on there as well. But those are very big hitters. There could be any other sort of game that would take up these 2 spots. I honestly have no idea. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Android Central has reached out to Sony about its PSVR2 development plans, but they did not get back to us in time for publication. We will update the article once we have more information. I should have seen the writing on the wall when Sony's Insomniac game studio got hacked in December 2023, revealing that the company wasn't working on a single VR game for Sony's flagship system. Again, I don't really agree fully with this statement. I mean, if we were looking at 5 years ago or 6 years ago, when Insomniac didn't have one of the biggest flat screen IPs that takes a hell of a lot of time to develop in Spider-Man and also now Wolverine, I would agree and say, yeah, we should expect them to be developing a PSVR2 game or a PSVR game at that time. They did have a foot in the door in the VR space at that point, but now they've shown their quality as a flat screen developer. They have one of the biggest gaming franchises in the world. Why would Sony want to divert some of their resources away from Spider-Man 3, away from Wolverine, and have them make a VR game? When we're looking at studios as examples to show support of PSVR 2, Insomniac right now, in my opinion, is not one of the ones we should be looking at. Again, they go on to say that Insomniac made 4 games for Meta's, then Facebook's Oculus Rift platform. Yes, back when the headset was the Rift. And Stormland was a great game. But again, we're looking so far into the past that the priorities for the studio have changed at that point. They go on to say last year Sony released just 3 PSVR 2 games and is yet to officially announce even one first-party game coming out for the system in 2024, let alone 2025. Of those 3 games, Firewall Ultra developer First Contact has since shut down. That's because, yes, the game did not launch very well, did not sell very well, and was clear that it would just be a money sink with trying to get it back on its feet, so unfortunately was abandoned and the studio was closed. They then mention the Studio London closure. Again, they were a PSVR developer with Blood and Truth. Blood and Truth was great. However, they were not working on a VR title at the time of closure, so I don't see that really as a cost-cutting measure for VR. It's just a cost-cutting measure for Sony in their game industry as a whole, closing a studio that was making a game but not a VR game. Even Firesprite, the Call the Mountain developer, has seen substantial budget cuts and personnel cuts, and even game cancellations. Yeah, that one is right on the money. Was really disheartening to see that. They then go on to mention Astro's lack of VR support, and essentially are just saying that it's disheartening not to see Astro support, and they assumed that it would be a VR game. Yes, it is disheartening to see Astro not on PSVR 2. I don't think there really is an excuse for that. Sony certainly have the budget to make a hybrid mode at least for it, but I do understand their strategy with making Astro a flat screen mainstay now. They're hoping to make it a franchise like Spider-Man or like Horizon. And to do that, they poured all of their resources into making it the best flat screen game possible, and I think it will sell incredibly well because of that. It was a smart business move. Sure, it sucks for us PSVR 2 users, and I really am disheartened that we're not getting it, but I understand the business move. But yeah, I do agree, should have had it, and it might be indicative of PSVR 2 support that Astro didn't get it. And finally, they mentioned the PC VR support, and essentially their biggest point here is that the headset's big features like dynamic foveated rendering and HDR won't work on PCs, along with the adaptive triggers, haptic feedback, and headset vibration. What they failed to mention though is that 0 games on PC VR use these features. This was the big thing that really got to me when this was announced, and a lot of people were complaining that the features weren't accessible. At the end of the day, modders might be able to get them up on their feet and working through just brute force, but almost all these features are not supported on any PCVR games, and no developer is going to go out of their way to add features for one singular headset. Nobody's going to be willing to spend that money out of their own pocket as a dev to add a feature that only 1% or 2% of their player base are ever going to care about. If Sony did enable the adaptive triggers and haptic feedback and eye tracking and headset vibration, you would put on your headset, be excited to test those out, and then play any game in your Steam VR library and discover that none of them support it anyway, so there was absolutely no point in having those features. It does not make sense to me at all, this complaint. None of these features are supported on 99% of Steam VR games, so frankly, it's not that big of an issue. The journalist finishes the article by saying, "We need to forget that PSVR2 even exists, and you're far better off getting yourself a MetaQuest 3 this year, which has exclusives like Batman, Hitman, and Just Dance." Agreed, Batman looks great. Hitman, don't really like the art style, but as a gameplay loop, it's going to be great. And Just Dance isn't my thing, but cool, great. 3 exclusives that do look pretty promising. They then go on to say that plus the upcoming meta games list is far longer than the PSVR2 list and includes many AAA games like Skydance's Behemoth, Alien Rogue Incursion, Metro Awakening, Metal Hellsinger, and maybe, just maybe, GTA VR. GTA VR has not been heard of in years, so if that does come around, wonderful. But as for this list being far longer than the PSVR2 list, every single game, bar GTA VR, on that list that they just named, is coming to PSVR2 at exactly the same time. This is the one thing that kind of annoys me with some of these articles, is they're clearly here just to spin a certain narrative one way. And that's the thing, I love all VR, I play a lot of PC VR, Quest is a wonderful platform, I really, really like it. But division like this in the VR space is what is killing VR as a medium, if anything is. I do believe that VR is going strong and will just continue to grow, but if there's anything that's going to hinder that progress, it's stuff like this, man. To disingenuously sit there and say that the PSVR2 list of games is so much shorter than the MetaQuest list of games, and then list a bunch of games that are coming to PSVR2 at exactly the same time as Meta, it doesn't make sense to me. I was with this journalist all the way through this article and trying to look at their points fairly, because they do make some good points, especially about studio layoffs and Sony's priorities in certain areas. But seeing this cap it off at the end with just blatant false misinformation, because only one of these games on this list is not coming to PSVR2, and that one might never come out at all, being GTA VR, it just doesn't really make sense to me at all. We need more unity in the VR space rather than people stripping different fan bases apart and not letting them come together and talk about VR releases that they're excited for and celebrate different headsets' achievements. Anyway, that's enough ranting for today. That was a bit of a tough article to get through because some good points, obviously, were made. Some very, very good points and some new information with the 2 PSVR2 games being developed by Sony, apparently. Be interesting to see what those are if they come to light. But it's just a bit of a sour taste in my mouth at the end of it when something like that gets said, which is blatantly just wrong. But anyway, thank you all for watching. Thank you to our patrons and YouTube members: Luke Bentley, Phil Irving, Hazit Mercer, Ace Gamer, Hippie Pickle, Jin007, A License to Chill, Sun WTF, Piosco, and Fat Controllers. Now, a community post will go up today, letting you guys know, but I am going away for a week. All the uploads will still continue. I've got a load of content lined up, so that's all good. But if I'm not as active in comment sections and stuff like that, that is why. Thank you all for watching. Thank you for your continued support. And if there's one thing you take away from this video, just be nice to all VR owners. Each platform has its own perks and downfalls in certain areas, but they're all contributing to virtual reality, which is the main wonderful thing. So thank you for watching, and I'll see you all in the next one.